Hey, we finally made it. We are live. We finally got our guest, Alejandro Kirk. Alejandro Kirk is a reporter alternating between various axis of evil outlets. Telesur, one of our favorite outlets in the world. He's reporting from Donbas for Telesur, and he's also a correspondent for HispanTV, which is an Iranian Spanish language network for the global South. And we know Alejandro from his excellent work in South America, specifically Venezuela, Colombia. He's a correspondent who's been around the world and is presenting a completely refreshing, alternate view of reality on the ground in the Donbas region for Western audiences and especially for audiences in the global South. So, Alejandro, welcome to the broadcast. Welcome to the Gray Zone. We got Anya Parampil here. Hi, Anya.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Max, and hi, Alejandro. Welcome to the Gray Zone.
Thank you for having me.
I think it would just be, before we get into the details of your reporting from the region over the last few weeks, if you could just give viewers an understanding of how long you've been in the Donbass. When did you arrive, and where have you traveled over the last few weeks since this special military operation began?
Well, I traveled from Caracas to Russia on the 22nd of March. So on the 24th, I was already in the Donbas visiting here in the Donetsk, and visiting of cities and places that had been recently bombed, like this town. And I arrived on the 24th and the 20th. Had a Tochka U missile had fallen on downtown Donetsk, killing 20 people. So that was the first place we visited, and then we went over to Valnavacha, a city which had recently been liberated from the Ukraine Azov battalion, and we visited the whole sheer destruction that took place there. And so that was my first impression of the Donbas, straight from the airport in Moscow to Valnavacha in what is now the borderline, the front line with the Ukrainian forces.
Max is muted, so
So I think what we should do, Alejandro, maybe is play a clip from one of your reports on Mariupol, since every U.S. network right now is leading with reports about Mariupol. You've sent us some footage also of the alleged mass graves, which we're hearing so much about in U.S. media. But you've interviewed people who have fled from the fighting, who have been witness to the fighting. Let's play one of those. Let's play one of those reports, and we'll just get your reaction.
She wants to give a message to her children who are not here, to tell them that she is healthy and she is alive.
We were in the house when the Ukrainian soldiers arrived, and they started beating me, provoking me right away. And they took things, they took cigarettes, they took food. They beat me on the floor. I still have a headache. Why all this? I don't know.
I think there are also those with full clarity of thought, like this gentleman, former serviceman of the Soviet army, desperate to fight the Nazis.
I am a high-caliber mind-clearing specialist. If you need my expertise, I'm ready at any time to provide any kind of help, guidance, or advice. As of, we would not let people out. No one was allowed to leave here. We were a live target that they were defending themselves with. We knew that Russia was not going to attack that hard, and we felt humiliated. You will see that on our floor, we have more than 1,000 people saved. Russia acted professionally in the attacks, otherwise no one would have survived.
Constant shelling is the framework of every trip to Mariupol. a symbol city, and now a pilgrimage site for reporters. When cannons fall silent, it will be the beginning of a new life. Cristian Inostroza and Alejandro Kirk, Telesur, Mariupol, Donbas.
So we see destruction all around, but we're hearing sort of a different perspective. What
Welcome to Tucker Carlson.
And somehow Tucker Carlson came on in the background because it was the next to play. We're hearing a very different perspective. What was your impression of talking to the residents of Mariupol? And was this sort of the consensus that they had been abused by the neo-Nazi Azov paramilitary, that they felt that they were prisoners being liberated, which is what we heard from those you interviewed in this package?
Well, I've been 4 times to Mariupol, and the impression I get is every time is a little different. The first day, which was these reports, people were extremely perplexed. They had just been taken out of the basements where they were staying. I don't know if you got my report on inside a basement where there's no water, no electricity. There's no heating, of course, and they live on the ground. So there is this perplexity about the situation, because on the one hand, they are ethnic Russians. On the other, they had their houses destroyed. So they are not happy about what's happening, and I think that's pretty normal. On the other hand, there is fear, and they told us off camera that they were fearing that there were Azov spies infiltrating among the population, seeking to take revenge against those who would speak to the press. And basically, at the beginning was the issue of surviving, getting some food, getting some water, getting some help, or getting out, which is what happened to half of the population. So on the following visits, the last one was last week, there is more self-confidence, and people speak more about what happened. And the story is always the same, not only in Mariupol, it's also the same in Valna Baja, in Stila, in Lugansk, even in the neighborhoods here, right here in Donetsk, that the bombing, well, it's different here in Donetsk, but in those areas where the Azov battalion were, they would occupy 1 floor of the residential building. Then they would put the people on the other floor, on the next in the next apartment, and establish fire points from there, mortars, machine guns, but also in the courtyards they would install tanks, artillery, or mortars, so that they were using effectively them as human shields. And everybody says that. I mean, I found nobody who would say, no, they left us alone, they allowed us to go, they did not want to put us on the fire line. I never found anyone saying that. And the more and more you dig into it, the more the truth is coming out, that these people were actually doing that which is forbidden by the Geneva Convention. So that's the, I only really speaking about liberation. Only one person said, she spoke English, actually. Very few people speak English. This person said that Azov were liberators, that Putin was a fascist. Only one. And I have spoken to dozens of people. They all say the same. Not happy with what happened. They don't feel really that they would have wished to be liberated like this, but they hope for a new life under the Russian administration. Everybody wants to join Russia, even within the republics. That's what I have seen personally. I don't know if anywhere else people might think differently, but that's exactly what I've seen.
I have seen those reports where you're speaking with people who, for example, were lining up to get humanitarian aid, which had come in from Russia, and you said you saw that people were not totally comfortable speaking on camera all the time because they were worried about infiltrators. But I'm wondering, can you have you been able to get close to Mariupol or speak with anyone who's been there in the recent days since these reports of the mass grave discovery emerged in Western corporate media, Western state media? What have you found which contradicts that narrative or supports it?
Well, I've been to Mariupol only 4 days ago. This report on the mass graves came up, I think, on Friday. And I spoke yesterday to Eva Bartlett, who was on Saturday at the mass graves. Actually, she filmed that clip that you just put on. And she was telling me that because they went especially for that this was a cemetery in which they were organizing the burial of the many people who have died in Mariupol. They were identifying bodies and putting a tomb for each one of them in an organized way. And then she says that there were about 300 bodies that she could more or less calculate in. But this is not mass grave. This is people who have died. They are identified and being buried. And significantly enough, she also said that part of the land there was reserved for Ukrainian soldiers. And according to the person she spoke to, the guy in charge of this cemetery, he said that they are our enemies, but they are human beings too. So this is not a mass grave. Nobody's denying the amount of people who have died. I have seen, and maybe you have seen my pictures of makeshift cemeteries within Mariupol, because bodies have to be buried. They cannot be, stay for hygienical reasons. So they are also taking these bodies over to a cemetery for proper burial and identification. That's what's happening. And this is a war situation. Somebody said to me, yes, but they are dead anyway. Yes, they are victims in this war on both sides, and they are victims of course, of the combat that is still happening at the Azovstal steelworks. But this is not a mass grave of unidentified people, and much, it's impossible that they are 9,000. So what amazes me and everybody here is that the easy way by which Western media take these rumors, this misinformation as truth. They broadcast it without any verification of facts.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks to everyone for being patient and staying with us and bearing with us through these technical issues. But now we're rolling. Alejandro, I actually want to play some of the audio of that footage, which was taken by Eva Bartlett, and this is outside Mariupol, I assume. Yes.
Yeah, this is near Mariupol. This cemetery is not inside Mariupol.
Okay. I think it's instructive for everyone to just listen to the narration, because you'll see translation and discussion of what's actually written on the graves.
This guy was born in 41, Anatoly. This is a woman born in 1965. Another guy born in 1969. Another guy born in 73. You can see there are unmarked graves, 67, 62, 46. I guess they were buried here according to the number of, according to the queue, to the order when they were put buried. Mm-hmm. But it certainly doesn't look like here there are 2,000 graves here.
I think they're alleging 200.
Oh, 200?
Yeah. Now there's the existing cemetery.
Yeah, I took a look at that. Those graves date back to the 20s.
So this is attached to an existing cemetery.
There's no way of telling when these graves.
And we have been to that cemetery
Well,
before this
you can-
scandal of the
Yeah.
mass graves.
And those bodies were buried in 2021 and
in
before.
62. Well, certainly not young soldiers. There are. a few
Now, the
graves.
one speaking is Roman Kozarev. He's the RT correspondent.
This
He's
is
been
a
here
woman's
for
grave,
years.
born in 1956. Another woman's grave, born in 1935.
So born in 35, a lot of these people are, or the majority are elderly
They're all,
people.
elderly people.
At least the ones that are marked.
The ones that are marked, yes.
So what does it signify that those graves that are marked there are those of elderly people, and that this makeshift cemetery, if we can call it that, was attached to a long-standing cemetery in which bodies have been interred since 2021 and before?
Well,
And
I don't know.
How does that kind of disrupt the narrative that's being fed to Western media audiences?
Well, this is, just evidence that you're seeing that these people were not unidentified missing people. They are people who have their names, and they are totally identified to be buried because I don't know the cause of their death. Most likely, I believe some of them were killed in the combat situation. The others, I couldn't say where they come from, but what this video is showing is that there is no mass grave, and these people are not missing people who want to be, that the Russians want to hide from the public view. That cemetery is on plain sight from the road to Mariupol.
Mhm.
It's not hidden anywhere. You can see it from the car. So anyone going there, and anybody, I mean, not just anybody, because the Mariupol doesn't have electricity nor utilities. So you need a reason to go there. But anybody with a reason, meaning if you're a relative of somebody who is there, or you're providing humanitarian aid, you can go there with a simple piece of paper, as we do with a press release. So nothing is. The road is open. There are a few check controls. They are not exhaustive. You are not being searched, and you can see all this from the road. So there's nothing, no conspiracy theory here at work, in my view.
I suppose the point to understand is that when we hear the term mass grave, it's implying that Russia has taken however many bodies, dumped them unmarked, sometimes together in some sort of burial in order to hide the fact that there are bodies or casualties in this war. And instead, the point that you're making is that yes, there was heavy fighting, and you've covered this. You've said in your reports that the combat must have been absolutely ferocious and brutal in Mariupol. There's no doubt that hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers, combatants, in some cases, likely civilians as well, died. And so Russia had, as they are, as that battle drew to a close, had the responsibility of burying the dead. And the fact that they did go through the process of marking them, trying to identify them, and even, as you say, burying them essentially in plain sight suggests that this isn't the as kind of mass grave scenario that the mainstream media is trying to tell us is what took place in Mariupol. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to explain there?
Absolutely. When you talk to me about mass graves, in a situation like Mariupol's, I would say somebody killed hundreds of people, thousands of people. They took him in trucks and opened a big ditch
Right.
so that they could be buried without any identification. That is a mass grave in the sense that we have seen in movies from the Nazis in the Second World War, right? This is not the case. Many bodies are still under the rubble in Mariupol. The new mayor told us that he estimates about 5,000. The head of the Donetsk People's Republic said that 5,000 is a very moderate estimate of what could have happened there. So we're talking about huge numbers of people, many of them combatants, many of them civilians who were trapped into this fight, and effectively, like it has been proven over, beyond any doubt, that they were being used as human shields. You might probably say, why did the Russians attack anyway? That's a question that I'm not responding. But certainly, these people were already, and they have told us many times, treated as second-rate citizens in Mariupol because they were ethnic Russians. They were harassed, and there is a guy called, a journalist called Maxim Grigoriev. He's investigating. He has been investigating war crimes and human rights violations for the last 8 years in the Donbas area. And there are over 1,000 disappeared people in Mariupol in the period before the military operation. So there wasn't in Mariupol a situation of peace and prosperity as the Ukrainian leadership and the Western media tried to portray. It wasn't the case. But the sheer destruction, I think, is something that the Russians are trying to avoid in the offensive that is now taking place north of Donetsk.
Yeah, a lot of people, well, I would say most Western news consumers don't know that Mariupol was a largely Russian-speaking city with a large portion of the population that's ethnic Russian, which would actually be supportive of Russia's objectives. And that when the Azov battalion, on behalf of the Ukrainian military, took over in 2014, there was sort of a purge. Local officials, opponents of this takeover were disappeared. The same in Kharkov, all across Ukraine. And now we've seen a Ukrainian mayor on Ukraine Channel 24 openly call for yesterday the assassination of so-called Russian collaborators. So this has been the situation since 2014. And a quick point about Bucha, since that's where the mass grave narrative first emerged. The mass grave narrative first emerged, and I'm not saying there have not been mass graves, in mid-March, and it was reported in Western media and the BBC that there were these mass graves in Bucha, but I've subsequently seen reports, including in German media, in Western media, that many of those in the initial mass graves were actually combatants who were so-called territorial defenders, those recruited from Western Ukraine and kind of thrown right into the front lines as cannon fodder by the Ukrainian military, who died in large numbers. Are you hearing anything similar to that, that many of these graves are just filled with combatants?
I didn't hear you very well because the connection is not very good.
Let me throw another question to you. Can you hear me okay, Alejandro?
Yes, I can.
We're
Yes.
speaking with
Go ahead.
Alejandro Kirk. To everyone who's joining, who's just recently joined, he's reporting from Donbas for Telesur. Alejandro, what are you hearing about what's happening at Azovstal, the Azov steel factory, where the dead enders of the Azov battalion are holed up, apparently with their family members, using them as basically saying that there are civilians there and that they will not surrender?
Well, we have been close to that Azov style fighting. It's very complicated even to understand when you are there, because it's a huge piece of land, about 8 hectares of industrial buildings, waste zones that, for the materials that the industrial waste. And there is this huge installation construction underneath. a very complex set of tunnels. They talk about, the military told me they have a 30-meter concrete wall protecting the underground, because it was a strategic military installation in the Soviet Union's times. So that has been designed for thousands of people to live there, survive there, work there, and having hospitals, supplies, and everything. So that's more or less the situation down there. What we get from the Russian forces is that around 1,000 people, 1,000 combatants are there. 400 of them might be mercenaries, according to the Donetsk military command. And that some of the civilians that are there are their families, but some others are the families of workers of Azovstal. So I think nobody knows exactly who is there, but what is clear is that the Marine commander of the Ukrainian forces there said that they will not allow the civilians go out if they are not granted passage to the Ukraine, to their territory. And this, if this is not human shields, what is it? Today, the Russians organized a humanitarian corridor to let, once again, asking the people trapped in there to leave, to allow the civilians to go free. I don't know what the result of this humanitarian corridor has been. So far, there is no information here in Donetsk. So Putin, it was clear that when they occupied the territory of Azovstal, they were planning an assault inside. There was talk of chemical weapons being used in Azovstal. We were very close to Azovstal, about I don't know, 1,000 meters away. We could see the planes bombing. We could hear the artillery and the smoke, but we didn't feel, we didn't see, we didn't smell any chemical weapons that could have been used. That was, like I'm saying, 4 or 5 days ago. So now they are trapped inside, but in my perception, they could stay there for months if they have the proper supplies, and they might have them because that's being designed for that. So this combat or this very strange combat in Azovstal may take still a few weeks, but the city is coming back to life. Even a school opened there last week. The church masses for the Orthodox Easter, which took place this weekend, were also being celebrated in Mariupol. So the new authorities are trying to put the city back in order so that it starts working. And one of the main priorities is hygiene, the litter and the bodies that they have to be found. And there are many people still, I think, trapped in basements.
We are speaking once again with Alejandro Kirk. He's a reporter who's been traveling throughout Ukraine and the newly independent territories since the outbreak of this special military operation. I'm wondering, Alejandro, can you tell viewers, does it seem as though, from your sense on the ground, that when the dust settles here and some sort of solution hopefully is negotiated, will Mariupol be part of Ukraine, or is it going to follow in the footsteps of the independent republics?
Well, the whole military operation has been its goals have been defined as recovering the territory of these oblasts or provinces, Donetsk and Lugansk. And Mariupol is part of the Donetsk Oblast. So that's already the People's Republic of Donetsk. There is no way back from that. So life is organized as it is organized here, which is a little different, if you allow me to, because I was surprised by that too. In this Donetsk People's Republic, you have a social democratic sort of, or socialist social scheme for benefits, health, education, and housing. So that has been dismantled in the Ukraine over the last 8 years since the Maidan coup. So according to what we spoke to the mayor, the new mayor of the city, together with getting the city cleaned up and getting the population fed, the city will be reorganized according to the social laws that are in place in the Donetsk People's Republic, and not those of the Ukraine, which were of a neoliberal type. So everything will be different, and it's becoming to be different right now as we speak, because they've taken no time in reorganizing life in the city. They are not waiting for the war to end to do that. Everywhere they go, even the monuments that are being, that the Ukrainians, the Soviet monuments that the Ukrainians took, knocked down, they are putting them back together. It's part of the plan. So, the honoring the soldiers of the Great Patriotic War. So life is beginning anew, and that's the plan: quick, fast, and efficiently. That's the way I see it. I don't know if it will be that efficient or that quick, but what I saw is that.
And how are they able to recover in such a rapid way, considering the war and the devastation that the region has experienced over the last several years? Is it Russian assistance that makes this possible?
Well, basically, there are two things that I have seen in my last trip, which is different from the other trips. Is that in several buildings, I saw people, sort of neighbors committees, gathering together, organizing the clean up of the buildings, getting rid of the rubble, piling together bricks, steel, and whatever rubble there is, and trying to see what can be used now, what needs to be done in the near future. That's on their own civil initiative. They are also organizing themselves the distribution of food. But on the other side, the Russian civil society has been pouring humanitarian aid to Mariupol. So we see convoys of trucks, even private cars, vans, pickup trucks, delivering humanitarian aid to Mariupol, collected by the people in Russia. But on top of that, obviously, what will help in reconstructing these cities is the Russian state. They are talking here about holding a referendum on joining Russia, and most people I have spoken with, they want that, not remain independent, but join Russia as part of Russia.
Wow. I actually just dropped in the chat, Max, one of Alejandro's reports on the humanitarian aid shipments, if you want to play it so that people have an idea of what that looks like.
Sure. Was going to ask about your report from the Mariupol theater, but we'll get to that later. That's something that I was looking into. Let's get this up.
Now we go with our special envoy to Ukraine, Alejandro Kirk, to get a better understanding about what is happening at one of the humanitarian corridors created by the Russian military to help civilians out of Ukraine.
Mariupol. Behind me, a queue of people expecting to receive humanitarian aid from the Russian forces and from the People's Republic of Donetsk. These people are have been the subject of many suffering in the last 3 weeks. fierce combats have been taking place in this town. Many buildings are destroyed or burned by the combat. They were used as a human shield by the Ukrainian forces and also by the Nazi battalions that were operating here. For the last 8 years, these people did not have the right to their own language. For 8 years, these people under Ukrainian rule were second-class citizens for being ethnic Russians. And now they are afraid. And why they are afraid? Because it is suspected that many Ukrainian spies, many Ukrainian infiltrators are among them, again, threatening their lives. And that's why when we speak to them, they say one thing on camera and they say a whole different story out of camera. They won't say the real, the openly the truth, because they have lots of fear. And fear, apart from perplexity, apart from this sensation of discomfort, is what we perceive in these faces today in Mariupol.
Thank you, Alejandro, for this information.
So you're describing a lot of like the fear of returning.
And before I move to the next story, I
wanted to, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add about that before we move on to a topic I'm just interested in.
Yeah, what I would add is that so my perception of that perplexity and fear has been diminishing over the different, I've been there 4 times in 4 weeks, and every week is different. It's more open. People are more confident. People are going to the streets. Some people are already organizing. Capitalism works in the sense that some are selling stuff outside buildings for the neighbors. Some kind of trade is beginning to happen. And so people look less fearful. And this is because the battle is ending. And you don't see, for example, you don't hear, at the beginning, you could hear a lot of machine gun fire very close to where we were. In the last visit, we didn't hear any more gunfire of that kind, which means to me that there is no street fight. But what you could hear is detonations of the planes and the artillery. But I'm told that is ending too, because just waiting for these people to come out of the holes they're digged in.
Yeah, I don't know if we are having an audio issue here, but thanks for filling us in about what's actually happening. The Mariupol narrative really exploded onto the Western media's radar with 2 incidents. First, the alleged Russian airstrike on a Mariupol maternity hospital, which that narrative has been severely complicated by some of the women who were inside who delivered testimony after entering Russian territory that there was shelling nearby, but there never was an airstrike. We reported on that at the Gray Zone. It's still unclear to me what exactly took place there, except civilians were in extreme distress. And there was an effort to exaggerate, specifically by AP, immediately what took place to kind of to get the Western public more invested in an interventionist mentality. And then what followed there was the alleged Russian airstrike on the Mariupol Dramatic Theater, where outside the theater from the air, you could see writing on the grounds marking that the theater contained children. Russian or Ukrainian language was inscribed on the grounds stating children inside. And then there was an explosion, and this was used to highlight the murderous savagery of Vladimir Putin personally and the Russian military. However, there were so many just strange details that compelled me to publish an investigation on this incident. down to the fact that many of the evacuees said that the Azov battalion, which controlled that theater and which was holding civilians basically hostage in the basement, had actually detonated an explosive charge to implicate Russia, that there was no evidence of deaths there, that all evacuations had taken place a day before the supposed explosion. And then we had photographic evidence showing that all vehicles were removed from the site prior to the explosion, whoever did detonate it. And on and on. You can check out that report at the Gray Zone. But Alejandro, you were able to actually visit the theater. I want to play a clip from your report there and then get your impression of what you saw.
This is the theater of Mariupol. It's been taken by the Russian forces already for 2 weeks, and it was destroyed, according to the Russian spokesman, by the Ukrainian forces, which were installed in this theater and had hostages in the basement. We were told that this was exploded from inside by the retreating Ukrainian forces, trying to blame Russia for the this is a cultural catastrophe, and also to slow the advancement of Russian troops.
A reporter in a helmet and armored vest on the scene is certainly a good way to tell the story of the city of Mariupol in Donbas. But this other simpler one is perhaps much better.
This chilling continues every.
So Alejandro, what did you see inside the theater, and what made you conclude that Ukrainian forces, and specifically the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, which controlled the theater, what made you believe that they were responsible for that explosion?
Well, actually, no, I did not conclude anything because I don't have the whole information. But what I did was quote the spokesman, who explained to us, a military spokesman, in detail how these explosions from inside had been detonated by the Azov battalion. So they explained to us that it could not have been a bomb from outside because there was no aerial attack against the theater. What I saw, even, we saw a couple of bodies there. There was smell, heavy smell coming from the basement. They did not want to undig to open that basement because they were afraid of booby traps. So the sappers were working in order to find out whether there were mines, or it was a very unusual visit because the battle was still raging very close to us, and they allowed us to get into the building and see this in order probably to dismantle the narrative that you have been describing here. But conclusive proof of anything is impossible for a short visit to a place like this. But I tend to believe, that there was this person that after if you see the clip afterwards, people in town described a situation in which they were that they were surrounded by fire before the Russians showed up, but no actually supported nor contradicted the Western narrative that it was destroyed by the Russian, except the spokesman for the Donetsk Republic armed forces. I'm not an expert in explosives, so I cannot say, but it looks like destroyed from within. It looks like that. It's my view as a reporter.
Yeah, and sorry if I mischaracterized your report. You say that it looked like there were explosions from the inside. Did you notice any sign of that evacuations or rescue efforts had taken place, or of dead bodies anywhere?
Well, it was when we visited this, it was long after this happened. I mean, at least 2 weeks after this happened. But for an aerial attack, you would have destruction outside the building. not only in the building. So you saw the images outside. The street is perfectly neat. The park is complete. There's no destruction in the park. The only destruction is the theater. So I don't believe really in this intelligent bombs. So if you have planes bombarding, you will destroy the target and everything around it. That's the basic of all aerial attacks, also in this military operation. So I don't see any evidence of that kind of aerial attack that would destroy what you saw inside and what part of the theater. What happened in the basement, I really can't say. Nobody, in my position, could tell what happened in the basement. But all evidence that, or whatever I could see there was supporting the narrative that it was exploded from inside.
Yeah, it was just
what I said.
Yeah, it was just such a weird incident. I mean, there was never any footage of rescue efforts. There was no footage of mass civilian evacuations. There was no footage of dead bodies being taken out. And in the end, CNN, after they just completely moved on from what was said to be the worst loss of civilian life in the war, all they had was this 10-second clip of people running downstairs. And they said they were covered in ash, but I didn't even see any evidence of that. And then I discovered this. Let me just throw these photos up on screen. So there were vehicles. The supposed attack took place on March 16th. But on March 15th, there were numerous vehicles parked in front of and alongside the theater. 2 days later, they were all gone. So there were no destroyed vehicles, which is what you would have expected to see if there was a massive airstrike. And it suggests that all the vehicles were removed before something took place, something dramatic, by those who controlled the site around the theater, because they didn't want the vehicles to be damaged. Here you can see, these are two different looks at the vehicles around the theater. Here you see one with a giant barrel of something. And I should also mention that in my article, I found, including in the Human Rights Watch report about the theater, there were images of military-aged men piling things against the theater, claiming it was a field kitchen, but they were piling large barrels against the theater, which were subsequently seen after the explosion. But here you see on the left vehicles, then you see the Maxar satellite image showing vehicles parked right in front of the theater, and then there's the words children. Then this is the day after the explosion, completely clear of vehicles. And you look at the parking lot in the lower right-hand corner, there are no vehicles whatsoever. You would have expected in an active combat zone, if the vehicles had been destroyed in an airstrike, that they would still be there because Ukrainian forces wouldn't have had time to tow them away. So to me, without saying this is a smoking gun, it's definitely a scintillating piece of evidence interrupting the official story, which of course Western media has completely moved on from. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there.
Yeah, well, I've seen in the visits the craters that aerial attacks leave. You don't see them there. It's not only the cars. If you have a car destroyed by an aerial attack, you would have the crater that the bomb produced.
Right.
It's not a concrete bomb pavement. So it's hard. It's even for what you said it's difficult to discuss what really happened because of this way the Western media have been treating everything. Meaning, if you take the propaganda narrative on either side, but as truth, without any verification of facts, or without testimonies, without anything, then you are unable to really get into the issue and discuss it reasonably. What could have happened? Because you have a narrative that already established that the Russians, in a very stupid manner, wanted to destroy the theater and kill everybody inside, including the children in the basement. So that any, nobody is that stupid to do such a thing. So something else happened there, but you can't discuss it because the Western media will say now there are 9,000 people in a mass grave near Mariupol, and the Russians went to destroy the theater and kill everybody inside because they wanted to, because they're evil. And that takes away, the actual debate that should be happening now.
Right.
It's not happening because of that.
Yeah. I wanted to just remind everyone who's watching the video to hit the like button and subscribe too, because if you do that while we're streaming, it's more likely people will tune in and catch Alejandro Kirk's perspective here. Alejandro, in spite of these narratives that we've broken down, from the mass grave outside of Mariupol, the alleged mass grave, and the alleged attack on the theater in Mariupol, you've said earlier in this broadcast that things are slowly returning to normal. As you visited over the last 4 weeks, you say people are making more of an effort to locally organize, pick things back up, and build a life and start discussing the future of Mariupol. The war narrative there has failed. And so I'm wondering if you can describe where exactly the war is headed as it moves on from Mariupol. What exactly is happening right now in this conflict?
Well, the war is actually concentrated now in the northern part of the Donetsk Republic and Lugansk. More Donetsk because half of the territory of this republic, which is the old oblast or province within Ukraine, is still Edward Basurin told me the other day that about 90,000 to 100,000 Ukrainian troops are still there, and they are not surrounded, not yet encircled. That they have supplies coming from center Ukraine. So the military operation is trying to encircle these troops and destroy them. But that is not that easy. It's easy to say here, but these are highly trained, very well. They have fortifications there. They have equipment to fight back. So, and I'm sure that the Russians do not want to repeat there what happened in Mariupol. They don't want to destroy the entire city. So they have been taking, together with the militias, town by town, heading for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, where the heavy industry is located. It has to be said that because sometimes in this description of things, they don't explain that the Donetsk, this part of Ukraine is the industrialized part of the Ukraine. This is where machine tools are built, locomotives, heavy industry, heavy machines for mining. So this industrial zone that was the main industrial zone of the Ukraine, and they don't want to destroy all that, and they don't want that to happen, to get a situation like that of Azovstal, where a big part of the steel works has been destroyed. So in my view, it's going to take a while before we get a final result. But this is part of, if anybody has studied a little bit the Soviet and Russian military doctrine, they are not on for blitzkrieg. They are not for rapid successes, which are spectacular, but they go for massive, what they call deep war by echelons, wars gradually until they totally achieve their goal. And the goal is the total destruction of the enemy. At least that's what in the books. So I think we are witnessing now that kind of war, increasingly stronger, not quick, but getting results. And if you see, in the past few days, Russia declared that the goal now is to consolidate the eastern part of Ukraine already taken, and the south. And the south includes Odessa, which has not been taken yet, but there have been several attacks already, preparation for probably a massive land attack by destroying the airport of Odessa. And you have Transnistria, which is the breakaway country from Moldavia, which is on the border between the Ukraine and Moldavia, which has already been a draft operation as well. So this is what they are doing, slowly consolidating the south and east, and of course, in all these places, they are trying quickly to reorganize life, because that's also the Soviet tradition. When they were advancing in the Second War, every time they retook or liberated an area, they quickly reorganized the life there. And it must be said that this society, I'm very surprised, pleasantly surprised. It's a very organized society. People don't need to be, they're not waiting for the help or the aid to arrive. They quickly organize themselves. That's what they are doing in Mariupol. And funny things that happen, for example, if you cross the street here with the red light, people tell you not to do that. And a friend who has been here for decades says that that's Soviet style. You're not only law abiding, you make other people abide by the law. So I think if this society is so well organized, that's what also a very important part of what the future will be like in the next few months and years.
Yeah, Alejandro, you actually have reported from inside the independent republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, or at least Donetsk, and shown the civilian suffering that's been taking place for years and how the situation is gradually being transformed with the Russian advance and the advance of the People's Defense Units from the independent republics. Let me just play one of those, a clip from one of those reports, and get your comments.
The Ukrainian rule.
Parents defended the Russian language for a long time, but they kept translating it into Ukrainian for their children. It was difficult to speak Russian at home, and it was difficult to speak Ukrainian at school. Now we have to retrain ourselves because for 2 years we have been speaking Ukrainian. The children are learning now. It'll be a little bit difficult, and they speak Russian at home.
And sorry again about the echo. Basically, you have a woman who's a parent at a school in Donetsk describing, or in the Donbas, describing how basically the Russian language was systematically assaulted for the past several years. What's happening in this town now?
Well, that's the town of Valda Baja, recently liberated. I think it's proper to say that word, because these people are ethnic Russians, and like almost everybody here, 80% of the population in these areas is Russian. So they speak Russian at home, and they were telling us what you heard is that at school, children were forbidden to speak their home language, even among themselves. They were the principal of the school said that it was a directive to make children speak Ukrainian all the time, so that they, in the end, will probably forget or Russian would be their second language. That's tough, but because it was also tough that the school books, the texts, were erasing the Russian history, erasing the history of the Great Patriotic War, and installing a new narrative of Bandera and the nationalists that helped the Germans and fought against the Soviet power after the war. So they now have become heroes, as you know, in the Ukraine. And so it seems that it's impossible to happen, but it does happen that after a few decades of brainwashing, of your history being denied, your language being denied, your culture, you end up with a generation of people who see their own past as so distant that it doesn't matter anymore. And that has to do with the monuments, with the, this country, I have noticed they cherish their history. And they're very proud of what they achieved in the Great Patriotic War. They say this is a celebration with tears because everybody here has a relative who died, who was killed in that war. 27 million Soviet citizens were killed. So that's not easy to erase, but they not only not erase it, they raise it. Everywhere there is a monument dedicated to the heroes, not only the military, but the resistance, the working people. This town, Donetsk, is a mining town, and there is a real, which I haven't seen anywhere else, cult of the miners who the actual workers. It's a cult everywhere. There is a little monument for the small miners, the one who dig into the earth, because everybody here is related to that. So if you erase that, you erase the entire identity, and that's what the Ukrainians were trying to do. And they told us that, so the children and the parents, even the teachers. There was a teacher who said, I'm a teacher of Ukrainian, and I'm ready to retrain myself to start a new life here.
Just as an illustration of how of the decommunization policy of the post-Maidan government or regime in Kiev, which has been determined to erase all signs of the Soviet Union and of its victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Here's a tweet by former first daughter Chelsea Clinton. It really goes to the liberal mentality that's so prevalent right now. Ukraine has finally removed all 1,320 Lenin statues. Our turn. And she's saying our turn like now we're going to remove Confederate statues. So she's conflating Lenin with Robert E. Lee. It's such a bizarre tweet, but it really speaks to the mentality of, U.S. coastal affluent liberals who last year had Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns and now have Ukrainian flags flying over their homes. But it also shows that 1,320 Lenin statues have been destroyed and dismantled in Ukraine, along with statues of Soviet partisan heroes, female partisans who killed Nazis and fought Nazis during World War II have been destroyed, as all part of a policy of essentially erasing history and altering the mentality of the next generation of Ukrainians. Anya, I don't know if you had any further questions for Alejandro. I had a few more.
I know it's hard to make predictions, but what do you think it will take for this war to end? I mean, it seems as though the Russians are prepared to fight for as long as it takes, but would likely prefer for the Ukrainians to come forward sooner rather than later, prevent the loss of further life, and reach a negotiated solution? What do you see?
Well, before, I mean, predictions are not my specialty, but before saying that, talking about the symbols, I did a story on that because I noticed here that the Lenin statue here is a huge, I would say, very different from other statues of Lenin that I have said, because it's more casual, as this kind of walking with a hand in his pocket. And there are many Soviet symbols here all over the place. So I asked people who lived here, even the head of the Communist Party, what does it mean? Why? You know, you have seen the the Russian soldiers carrying red flags, even on their uniforms. The Soviet flag is everywhere we go when Soviet, Russian, and Donetsk troops are around. Everybody knows the story of that babushka, the old lady who was they tried to humiliate her, and she ended up humiliating the humiliators, so the Ukrainian soldiers who stepped on the Soviet flag. So what does it mean? And they answers. One of them is that people here cherish the Soviet times because they have benefit from times that are valid right now. So it's things that has to do with their daily life. But also because for many, the Soviet flag represents the united country, peoples who were united, and they were a world power that was facing the United States, that produced the best science in the world, the best sports, the best. So they feel that they were probably the best in the world in many respects. And what happened later was the dismembering of the Soviet Union and the attempt to eliminate Russia. And so that's another thing that I have noticed, is that everybody I speak with say, we want the Soviet Union back. We want to be together with the Ukrainians because they are our people. We are the same people. And many people say it's not true that in the war, the Ukrainian people supported the Nazis. That was a small group of like 50,000 people, but the entire Ukrainian population was, there are many books and movies of how the Ukrainian population fought the Nazis along with the Russians. So they were part of the same people, the Soviet people. So it's very interesting to see Lenin everywhere, not as a communist symbol, but as a symbol of unity and a powerful country. On predictions, I really can't respond that. According to the Soviet military tradition, they would go for the entire Ukraine, dismember the Nazis, get rid of the small group that's leading that regime, and reorganize the life there and withdraw. If that's going to happen, I don't know. Maybe it's not possible because the Ukraine is getting tons and tons of weapons. At the same time, it seems that the Ukraine is being corroded from inside by this corrupt group that took over the power in 2014. So some say that in Russia, Putin was able to organize and discipline the oligarchs in order for a state project, which is a common project for Russia, whereas in the Ukraine, 3 oligarchs have been able to divide the country among themselves and basically loot it. You can see that the infrastructure, everything in Ukraine is falling apart, has been falling apart for years. And now these weapons, it looks like they're selling the weapons they get from the West in the world black market, and that they are also taking the money that they are getting from the West. But this is no gift. So it must be remembered that these weapons and this money are loans that the Ukrainian people will have to pay for decades. And that's what the narrative also doesn't explain. These are loans, not gifts.
Right, right. We saw the surprise visit, which was announced 2 weeks ago in U.S. media by Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense and former board member of Raytheon, the maker of the Javelin missile, which is so popular among the Ukrainian military, and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who I call Tony Blinkskrieg, who was one of the founders of West Exec Advisors, which is a consulting firm with clients in big tech and the arms industry who are seeking contracts with a future Democratic administration. And now they get their guy in one of the most important positions to authorize arms sales. So both of them are guaranteeing themselves future clients and positions on boards. And then you have Zelensky, who probably will get some awards ceremony appearances. He was just at the Grammys in the future in exchange for throwing Ukrainian cannon fodder with these new weapons at the Russian military, or, as you mentioned, selling weapons on the black market. We know that Igor Kolomoisky, one of the three major oligarchs controlling Ukraine's economy, is the chief patron of Vladimir Zelensky, as well as the Azov Battalion and the Aidar Battalion, two of the main forces in the Ukrainian National Guard, as you mentioned, Alejandro. So it does seem like this will go on. This war will go on for quite a while. I guess I had two questions for you. First is how long you plan to be there and what you plan to cover. And then I wanted to kind of ask you about the perspective of the war from the South, since you were reporting for a global South population that speaks Spanish. So I don't know which one you wanted to take first.
Well, I don't know how long I'm going to be staying here. My visa has expired, and I'm staying anyway. I don't know what kind of trouble I'm getting into in Russia. But I feel that I have to, for a while, keep covering this and trying to fix this legal hassle, which is not easy. You know, the Russian bureaucracy. On the other part, I think for the South, this is disastrous in a way. If that part of the world I come from, which is Latin America, which is, as you know, part of the area of influence of the United States, we're going to be left with the worst part of the economic disaster that is taking place now due to the sanctions against Russia. While Russia and China and India, Iran, and all these countries will be able to they are already reorganizing their finances, production, trade, getting rid of the dollar and the euro. We are going to be left with the worst part of it: the inflation, the lack of fertilizers that come mainly from Russia and the Ukraine. So we're going to be left as the second-rate victims of the victimization of the economy in the United States and the European Union, which is the main result so far of the sanctions. But if our peoples are getting this message, I don't know. I don't think so. I think they're swallowing, or they're getting the mainstream media message. You have pathetic situations like Argentina and Chile voting against Russia in the United Nations for expelling Russia from the Human Rights Committee. Chile even sanctioning Russia, not selling its lithium, sending money to the Ukraine. So it sounds to me pathetic in the sense that being a Pacific, the Latin American region should actually try to get into the Shanghai Club and getting into this new economy that it's emerging, and it looks much more powerful in terms of the future than the system, the unipolar system led by the U.S. With its second partner, which is the European Union and Japan. So the world will be divided in two, and we are getting into the losing part of it. It's my view.
Something I wanted to ask you about is a case which hasn't gotten a lot of attention in English media. And since you are primarily reporting in Spanish or from, as you say, Latin America, I'm wondering if you could explain for viewers what exactly happened with the Spanish journalist Pablo Gonzalez. The Polish security services arrested him at the beginning of this war. Can you share any information about who he was, why Poland may have targeted him in this way, and what the status of his case is?
Well, for what I have read, he is in a Polish jail near Warsaw. He was moved recently. He has been accused of spying for the Ukraine, for reporting what they say is pro-Russian reports. What surprises me is that the left or progressive government of Spain has not anything in favor, to rescue his citizen from this weird accusation of spying. Journalists, some journalists can be spies, but you're not spying but reporting what is what he was doing. And journalists are increasingly being targeted by the Ukrainian regime. One of them was already killed. Today, the Federal Security Service of Russia uncovered a cell whose mission was to kill Vladimir Solovyov, a very famous, well-known Russian reporter. We had the case of Gonzalo Lira, which is a bit murky. We don't know what really happened, but he's also denouncing to having been kidnapped by this Ukrainian security service. So, at the same time, Julian Assange is being extradited to the U.S. for exactly what they are denouncing Russia for doing, war crimes by the United States. So, I think journalism has been one of the main victims of this war, in the sense that if anybody used to believe in the objectiveness and the fairness and the pluralistic approach of Western journalism, that is all totally dead. And by censoring they are only creating a situation in which there will be just like a war, two sides facing each other, where the truth is not really easy to find.
Yes, I agree with you. And the casualties also include social media. We've seen how outlets such as YouTube removed entire channels belonging to RT. And there's been, as you say, a huge assault on the free flow of information and on journalists throughout this conflict.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin in a personally announced that a neo-Nazi assassination plot against several famous Russian journalists, including Soloviev, who you mentioned, who's sort of obsessed over in the West as Putin's top propagandist, but also other journalists reporting in the field, was foiled, and that there have been arrests made in Moscow. So this is highly significant, at least at illustrating how the Russian government is viewing the information war that's taking place, that it's moving into from just a war of information to actual physical space. And it, as we reported in the Gray Zone, you just go to thegrayzone.com, you'll find this piece at the top of the site on the systematic campaign to eliminate, through assassination, arrests, and even torture, those who are seen as insufficiently patriotic or pro-Russian, including Ukrainian officials. Vladimir Struk, the mayor of the eastern city of Crimea, was found shot in the heart. And Anton Gerashenko, who is the advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and has actually overseen a blacklist of journalists targeted for treason and pro-Russian views, many of whom, and where some of them have actually been killed. Gerashenko celebrated the murder of this mayor Vladimir Struk, a Ukrainian mayor, and said there is one less traitor in Ukraine. You have the mayor of Gostomel, Yuri Prilipko, murdered after entering in negotiations with Russians over a humanitarian corridor in his city. Then you have Gennady Matsegora, who is the mayor of Krupansk, whose daughter was kidnapped by the Ukrainian SBU security services. Denis Kuriv, a top member of the Ukrainian negotiating team after returning from Minsk for the first round of negotiations with Russia, was bumped off, iced in broad daylight in the streets of Kiev, likely by an SUV hit squad. These are Zelensky's death squads, and Zelensky himself has called for attacks or the punishment of supposed collaborators. Now, and when we have the arrest of his top rival, Viktor Medvedchuk, the second most popular politician in Ukraine, and the arrest of several journalists. We saw Gonzalo Lira going dark and then returning saying he was detained by the Ukrainian SUV. But many Ukrainian journalists and human rights activists who are attacked as pro-Russian have been disappeared in recent days, and their names are not very well known at all. The list goes on and on and on. Alexander Matsuchenko on March 3rd in Dnipro, along with his partner, was tortured on camera by Azov neo-Nazis working with the Ukrainian SBU, and he is still in jail, being held without bail. I believe he's been sentenced to prison for treason. Then we have Oleg Novikov, who is a disabled rights activist from Kharkiv. He has been detained and disappeared by the Ukrainian SBU, accused of pro-Russian sympathies. Maxim Radonsky, a professional MMA fighter, was tortured on camera by Azov neo-Nazis working hand in glove with the Ukrainian SBU. His crime? Training with Chechen fighters at a gym training with Russian fighters at a gym in Chechnya. And Radonsky actually happens to be Jewish and has a Star of David tattooed on his leg. I don't want to show the video of this torture, although it's embedded in the article because it's too grotesque, and I don't know what YouTube will do to this video. But I wanted to call these names out because they really illustrate what Ukraine has become since this war. I don't know if I felt any threats to your life, Alejandro, because you're reporting from Russian-held territory, but have you had any contacts with journalists inside Ukraine or other dissidents? Or do you have any comments on this wave of repression that's sweeping across Ukraine under the direct watch of Zelensky while the Western media completely turns away?
No, first of all, here you don't feel threatened at all here in the Donbas. It's amazing the way you can report here because nobody, the only harassment here was we were filming inside a bus, and people started saying, away with the American spies, stop filming. So they thought we were American spies. And in one neighborhood here, Kievsky, where bombs still are falling, shelling, we were also filming there, and a neighbor, a female neighbor with two small children, was very angry, saying that we had to show her our credentials, our accreditation, because we could be Ukrainian spies targeting the buildings. So that's everything that we had in terms of problems for our work. Otherwise, you don't see cops. You film everywhere. You do stand-ups all over the place, in the parliament, the presidential house, whatever, no problem whatsoever. So you don't feel threatened. But I don't really have any contact with journalists in the Ukraine. You really feel when you're here that you're in a very distant environment, distant country. It's got nothing to do with the stories you're telling us about the Ukraine. This place is safe. It's a nice place to live in, actually, if you wanted to.
Well, we interviewed Russell Bentley, who's a full-time resident from Texas. Have you come across him at all?
Yeah, I met him. I met him in Valnavaja. They call him here the Texan. And he's very well known and he says he's a Communist Party member. I think he's a member of the local Communist Party as well, and he'll stay here forever. Yeah, he's a character, very, very interesting. And apart from his looks, he's very thoughtful in what he says. So his politics are clear. I don't think I agree on everything, but he's clear in his mind.
He's definitely clear. We'll probably have him back when we can. He's pretty busy right now in the field. We're coming up on it, an hour and a half. Anya, is there anything you wanted to add or any other questions?
I think it's just important for you to tell viewers where they can find your work. Unfortunately, I think there's an MLB player also named Alejandro Kirk. So when your name is put into YouTube, sometimes a bunch of baseball videos come up. So how can people specifically find Alejandro Kirk from the ground?
Well, actually, I'm not a blogger. I don't have my own account anywhere. I work for Telesur, so watch Telesur. That's where we are, telesurtv.net.
And on Twitter?
On Twitter, my name is Kirk Reportero.
So thanks so much for joining us.
Spanish.
Thanks so much for joining us, Alejandro. Thanks for all the work you're doing at Telesur, which I believe is sanctioned by the U.S. And our U.S. friends who work there were unable to get paid because of those sanctions. So this is a network that is directly targeted by the empire, and we can kind of see why, because it's presenting a completely different perspective from the ground on one of the most contentious issues of our time, which is this Russia-Ukraine war. So
we actually know what sanctions mean of our own personal life, but at the same time, I want to say that it's a privilege to be able to do honest journalism without having to be nice to anyone, report things the way you see them. And by saying all this, the three of us are already targeted as Putin propagandists, because any deviation from the official narrative will be taken as Russian propaganda. But we have to live with it. I admire Gray Zone, and I'm very thankful for having been invited here.
Well, we admire you too, your bravery and your work. And yes, everyone should be watching Telesur no matter what.
Definitely. And I think it's still on YouTube, unlike RT and RT America and so many other channels. But yeah, definitely watch Telesur from the South is a really important show to watch. And thanks for supporting us. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/grayzone. And definitely subscribe to our channel on YouTube and keep hitting the like button, because the algorithm has been suppressing us for some time. Thanks for bearing with us through some technical troubles. Alejandro was here reporting from the outskirts of a war zone, so we managed to get some internet, and we're going to be back very shortly with more excellent guests reporting from the field. And I think we're going to be covering, hopefully in the next few weeks, I definitely want to have a live stream on what's happening in Pakistan, so look out for that. But follow me on Twitter. I have a new Telegram channel, Real Max Blumenthal, and I'll be updating you about everything that's coming here at the Gray Zone. So thanks again. Peace.